century, was land that was coming into disuse. Now, these are controversial, by the way. There are some Palestinians who say you shouldn't trust Mark Twain. There are some Palestinians who say you shouldn't trust the various English travelers. Reasonable people could disagree about that. I quote those sources. I lay them out there for people to read so that they can evaluate the claims that Israel was established on the basis of colonialism. I make the following argument, which I'd love to hear Mr. Finkelstein rebut. You can't be a colonialist country unless another country sent people there as soldiers to take over that country. For example, France sent its settlers to Algeria. England sent its settlers to India. Dutch and other countries sent their settlers to parts of Africa with guns to take over. What did the Jews do during the first Aliyah and the second Aliyah? They escaped from countries that were persecuting them. They escaped from Russia. They escaped from Poland. They escaped from Lithuania. They didn't come at the request of those countries. If you claim people were colonialists, you have to say on whose behalf they were working. The Jews who came there weren't working on behalf of Russia. They weren't working on behalf of Poland. They weren't Lithuania. They came as refugees, much like American Jews came as refugees to America. The ones who went to Palestine went with rakes and hoes to try to build the land, to try to join collectively with the local population. They did, in fact, improve the land. As the result of work projects in Western Palestine, many Arabs from Eastern Palestine moved there. I cite statistics. Peter cites the same statistics, in fact, showing that in various kibbutzim, Rishon LeZion, and others, the fact that 100, I don't remember the exact numbers, Jews moved there attracted 300 or 400. You may disagree with it, but those are the data that I presented, and we can reasonably disagree with that.
Okay.
Now, I just want to make one point about Mr. Finkelstein's research. Well, I don't want to get ad hominem. I don't want to get into this debate, but for example, I do quote Mr. Finkelstein at one point, I think only once in the book, and that is he makes an argument in Edward Said's collection that to judge the 1947 partition, the only fair way to do it is to look at either all of Palestine, which I don't know whether he means to include what became Jordan, Transjordan, or not, or you have to look at what became of Israel after the 1948 war. I disagree with that. What I say, respectfully, in the book, is that when you look at the fairness of the 1947 petition, you only look at the land that was allocated to the state of Israel. And in that land, Jews were clearly a majority, according to the UN census. To be sure, once the Arab nations attacked Israel, once the Palestinians attacked Israel, there was a war, and Israel secured more land, which was regularized by a ceasefire in 1949. What Mr. Finkelstein does is he counts that land and says, aha, look at how much they got, and look at the proportion of Jews and Palestinians. That's not the correct demographic to look at. So, you know, we can have reasonable arguments
let's get a
about this,
response
but
to
let's
that
stay away from the ad hominems and get to the merits of the case.
You know, Professor Dershowitz, I'm not a professor at Harvard, but I do.
You seem to resent that a lot.
But I do teach elsewhere, and when we discuss issues like falsifying information, plagiarizing, lifting whole cloth from other books, I've never heard that called ad hominem. For a serious scholar and a serious academic, those are very fundamental issues.
But when they're false, they're ad hominem.
Okay, no, if they're false, then you dispute them.
That's what
But
I'm
to
doing.
Characterize them as ad hominem seems really out of court for a professor.
No, they
So
are ad
that's-
hominem.
let-
You're
let-
attacking. You said
sir,
I don't deserve
sir,
to teach
I
at
compo-
Harvard.
I-
That sounds
no.
pretty ad hominem
Okay.
to me.
Professor Dershowitz,
Finkelstein make his case.
you raised that issue. I'll try to address it, and then we're returning to the substantive issues of your book.
First, tell me why I shouldn't be
I'm
teaching
going
at
to
Harvard.
refer to that.
Okay.
On page 207 of your book, you say that to deliberately misinform, miseducate, and misdirect students is a particularly nasty form of educational malpractice.
Of which I accuse
Now,
Noam Chomsky.
I consider what you have done in the book to be a paradigmatic, a quintessential example of misinforming, miseducating, and misdirecting. You go
write-
on.
write an
Allow me
article,
to finish.
Write an article.
Let
Just
him
no,
make his
Allow
point.
me to finish, Mr. Dershowitz. I've been very respectful of your time. On page 213, you discuss the Holocaust fraud by Robert Faurisson. And you write, quote, there was no extensive historical research, referring to his book.
That's right.
Instead, there was the fraudulent manufacturing of false anti-history.
That's right. And Chomsky wrote, as you know, an introduction to one
Please
of
don't
his
bring
books.
in Mr. Chomsky. He can defend himself. We're talking about you and your book. It was the kind of deception, referring to Faurisson's book, now let me quote clearly,
Right.
for which professors are rightly fired.
I stand by
Not
that, of course.
because their views are controversial, and let me underline this again, but because they are violating the most basic canons of historical scholarship.
Well, let me respond to that.
Now,
If
no,
you can compare me to
I don't have-
Faurisson,
I
if
didn't
you
have-
can
I didn't
compare
compare you.
Faurisson made up a
I'm
story
referring
that
to
the
your
Holocaust
standard.
didn't occur.
I'm
Right.
referring to your
But you have to
standard.
understand the
I have no
context.
interest in Faurisson now. I'm talking about your standard.
Absolutely. I
To
stand by those
miseducate,
standards.
misinform, and misdirect, to violate the standards of historical scholarship are grounds for expulsion.
Absolutely.
So it's
And-
not an ad hominem argument. It's using your standard.
No, it's an ad hominem argument.
I'm going to
In
interrupt
fact,
here because I
make an
want
ad
to
hominem
get to
argument
some of
about
the.
Faurisson, of
I want to
course.
get to some of the main points
Yeah, let's
of
try
your
to
book.
do that. That would be
Also,
very nice.
we were intrigued on watching Scarborough Country when you debated Sam Husseini. The
Right.
offer that you made.
Right.
We want to just play it for a moment.
Please.
I'll tell you what, I will give $10,000 to the PLO in your name if you can find a historical fact in my book that you can prove to be false. I issue that challenge. I issue it to you. I issue it to the Palestinian Authority. I issue it to Noam Chomsky. I issue it to Edward Said. Every word in my book is accurate, and you can't just simply say it's false without documenting it. Tell me one thing in the book now that is false.
Okay, let's go to the book, The Case for Israel.
Can I just talk about that for 1 second?
Yes.
And let me tell you what he came up with. This is really fascinating if you show the rest of the clip. He said on television, I saw a photograph, or I said a videotape, of Israeli soldiers aiming their guns at that, 12-year-old boy who was caught in the crossfire and killed. And I actually upped the offer to $25,000 if he could produce a photograph or if he could produce proof that he had seen that. Why was I so confident? Because German television did a very thorough study of that one particular incident. Let's just spend 1 minute on that incident. What happened is when that child was killed in his father's arms, the nation of Israel went into almost universal mourning. It was as if they were sitting Shiva on one of their own children. A child had died, and it looked as if possibly an Israeli soldier might have shot him. When you contrast that to how Palestinians respond to a child dying in Israel from terrorism, dancing in the streets, it's a very striking comparison. Then German television did a study, and they found out that the Israeli soldiers were positioned in a way that it was physically impossible for the bullet from an Israeli soldier to have hit that Palestinian child, and it was virtually certain that the bullet had come from a Palestinian gun. In my view, that's not particularly relevant. When a child is caught in a crossfire, it's a tragic death resulting from the crossfire. Which bullet actually hit him was not relevant. But that was the answer that he came up with.
Norman Finkelstein.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify the monetary issue. Is it now $25,000?
It's $25,000 on that issue.
Oh, just
on
on
the
that
issue.
In general,
and,
it's $10,000.
And let me be very clear what I
We
said.
heard it. We just saw it on the
But let me
tape.
be very clear.
I think it's clear.
Then
It was
I
said
then
in the
made
tape.
it very clear. I said afterward, a material, willful
I don't want
distortion of
afterwards.
fact.
Professor Dershowitz, it's on tape. We just saw it.
But we're not talking about a spelling mistake.
Oh, no, I'm not
We're not
spelling.
talking about a minor
mistake
and a
far
footnote.
be it for
We're
me to
talking
be
about
so
a
trivial.
serious
All right.
material,
Let's
willful
talk
mistake
about-
of fact that I
Okay,
deliberately
serious-
engaged in.
serious
Okay.
material
Yes,
facts.
Right.
Let's start. Number one, I'm going to first deal with just concrete facts which are not particularly controversial, which can easily be confirmed. On page 80 of your book, you write that according to Benny Morris, between April and June,
Benny Morris being an Israeli
historian, I have a copy